Well, let's go to Whaleshark, because Whaleshark is interesting, because
Yep.
I looked through your announcement, and there's a point where you talked about the MMI sampling
Yep.
and the relevance of that, because that's really interesting. I think
Yep.
a lot of people don't get that explanation of numbers.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So again, Whaleshark is another project that I've been involved in for a long time. Like, I worked on it with Western Mining back in '96, and the history was that we were there looking for an Ernest Henry, an IOCG. We're looking for an Ernest Henry, Olympic Dam, Prominent Hill, Carapatina, because we thought that it was the same geology in the Capricorn origin, in the Gascoyne complex, as it was in the Eastern Succession in Mount Isa and the Stuart Shelf and that in South Australia. So that project became available in 2019, so I pegged it, and I'd done a bit of work there back in the 90s. What you've got is you basically got the Capricorn origin, which is a Proterozoic, and then it goes undercover. You've got the Carnarvon Basin. So you've got up to 200 metres of sediments.
Yep.
Some places it's shallower, some places it's deeper. As you go towards the coast, it obviously gets deeper and deeper. But there's sort of like a corridor where it's about 100 metres. So it's reasonable exploration. And so I, as a geochemist back at Western Mining, I was trying to work out how we could explore through this material without going broke, and tried a whole different lot of geochemical techniques and what we call partial or selective leaches. So when you do soil sampling, or even when you do air core, most of the time you do a total analysis, which is a fire assay is called a total analysis. But there's these digests and analytical techniques that are called partial or selective. And partial means it only takes a certain amount of an element. So even aqua regia is like a partial digest. But there are things called selective leaches as well, which only take a certain part of an element. So MMI and BLEG and enzyme leach and things like that are what we call partial or selective digests. And the idea is that, the theory is that if you take an ore body and you cover it with dirt, and if it sits there for long enough, gas and water and stuff will move upwards from the deposit, and it will bring very small amounts of minerals of interest to the surface through gas or transfer or whatever. And then if you sample across the top and you have a sensitive enough technique and you have a sensitive enough analytical method, you should be able to see signatures of that. And this is what people have been working on for the last 20 or 30 years, to try and find a technique that will see through that sort of cover. So MMI is one of these techniques. And it's been successful in a lot of places, and the one that I really liked was at Javieron. So Javieron up in the Patterson, 400 odd metres of cover, and before they discovered it, they'd done MMI sampling, and they got copper, gold, silver, uranium, rare earths, lead and zinc anomalism. And there was a little bit of information published about it, but not much. But the other people, Antipa, had done it at Calibre and Magnum and all these things that up around Telfer, again through a couple of 100 metres of cover, and there was a bit of information in ASX announcements about that. So I thought, okay, well, let's go try MMI over Whaleshark. So Whaleshark's big target, it's about 30 k's long. It's a big folded banded iron formation with a granite. So we did 1 kilometre by 500 metre spacing, so sort of lines a k apart with samples 500 metres apart. And at the northeastern end, we got 2 really strong copper, uranium, rare earth anomalies. Nice and coherent, multiple samples. And the numbers, I think the highest copper number was 4,500 ppb. Now these are ppb, these are not ppm, they're not percent, but this is soil sampling through 100 metres of cover. So we're not really concerned so much about the actual numbers, so much as the coherence of the anomaly and the correlation between different elements.
Relative to background.
Relative to the background. And the correlation that you've got copper and uranium and silver, all anomalous in the same area. But when you do that and you then compare the numbers to, say, Havieron, I think the highest copper number at Havieron was 750 ppb, and we had 4,500. Now, they've got 400 metres of cover, and we think we've only got about 100, so you take that into consideration. But also, our sample spacing was a K by 500 metres, where theirs was 250 by 250. So, you know, it's pretty comparable. So I said, all right. So we went back and did infill, and there was 2 areas that we infilled, and we infilled them this time at 250 by 250 with MMI again. And yeah, they repeated. So we got strong copper, uranium, silver, some lead and zinc, but the copper, uranium, silver and rare earths, they're elements that you expect to see in an IOCG, in an Ernest Henry, in a Carrapateena, in a Prominent Hill, Olympic Dam, whatever, you know. So the anomalies are big. They're like, I can't remember exactly, but I think they're, you know, a couple of Ks by a couple of Ks sort of size. So they're quite big anomalies with coherent correlating elements. The great thing is that back at Western Mining, we did some real wide-spaced reconnaissance RC holes to just get an idea of the basement depths. And there's some holes near one of the anomalies where the basement depth's only 40 metres. So, you know, we're not talking about the Stewart Shelf in South Australia drilling through 500 metres of cover, or 600 or 800. We're not in the Patterson origin like Havieron looking at 400 metres of cover. So on the basis of that, I started hunting around for whatever information I could find on Ernest Henry. And I actually found an atlas that the Queensland government had put together on the Ernest Henry deposit, which was discovered by Western Mining. And it had all sorts of maps of like geophysical signatures, geology, and MMI sampling.
Yes, they were doing that back then.
They did. I think they did it after the discovery, as like a sort of a
after the
orientation sort of exercise, right? But there's actual information on the MMI signature of Ernest Henry. But the other thing is there's a whole data set on interface drilling. So what I mean by interface drilling is it's a bit like what we're doing at PGE. Drill through the cover when you get to the bedrock and just go into a couple of metres of bedrock and then take a sample of that interface. Because that interface is where all the water moves and everything.
Where the action is.
Yeah, so we think that what we can do next is there's a bit of gravity data, but it's a bit sort of sporadic and not very well levelled, so we might have to do a gravity survey. IOCG deposits, the I stands for iron, and that's normally hematite, and the hematite's dense. So gravity is normally a good signature of these things. So we'd probably go back and do a gravity survey just to get a brand new data set that's all sort of levelled. And then I think what we're going to do mid-year, we're going to get an air core rig, and we're just going to drill interface, do like a grid of interface drilling to see if we can get that MMI anomaly, but at the top of the basement, and then use that to then give us a drill target for like a diamond hole or an RC hole. But, you know, the target there is an Ernest Henry, and an Ernest Henry, you know, the sort of rule of thumb of these IOCG deposits is, you know, 100 million tonnes at 1% copper, 1 gram gold. That's sort of what you're looking for. I think Ernest Henry is now about twice that big. Prominent Hills was about that size. Carrapateena about that size. You know, 1% copper, 1 gram gold, and bulk.
They tend to grow as you develop the thing as well.
They do, but they tend to be. They don't tend to grow laterally. They tend to be more up and down. They tend to be like a carrot or a plug or something. So Carrapateena is the classic of that. Very small surface footprint, but deep. Havieron is sort of like Havieron. I don't know if that's IOCG. I've seen the core in that, and I'm not sure what people think it is yet. But again, that's sort of a cylindrical thing as well. So quite small surface expression, and they grow at depth, rather than laterally. Olympic Dam's like a funnel.
Funnel, yeah.
You know, Prominent Hill's a bit different. That's more sort of a bit structurally controlled. Ernest Henry's like a pipe. Had a very high conductive bit at the top where it had an EM anomaly, which is how it was discovered, and then it's like a pipe that goes down. So they have quite a small footprint on, you know, surface footprint,
yeah.
like not surface footprint, but sort of plan view footprint.
Yeah.
But then they go deep.
Yeah.
So that's your challenge, that because the plan view footprint's quite small, you want to do everything you can to focus in before you put the dual hole there. And you just talk to Rudy Gomez about that, how close you can be and miss it.
Yeah.
So yeah. But both of those, so Bangor and Whaleshark, they're the more conceptual things, but they are the bigger prize.
I mean,